How's everyone doing today? My name is Yupari and I'd like to welcome you to this week's portrait painting demonstration, and this week we will be using the Zorn palette. There's a lot of debate as to what the exact colors were in the Zorn palette, but it is known, or it is thought, that he used flake white, which is a lead white, vermilion red, and yellow ochre. For this demonstration I will be using my flake white replacement and my cadmium red light, my yellow ochre, and ivory black. So the Zorn palette is essentially a white, a red, a yellow ochre, and a black. The black itself is it's like a blue, so we really have the red, yellow, blue going on. For my mediums, I will be using, to the left of my cup, odorless paint thinner, and to the right, a 1/5 stand oil to 4/5 paint thinner mixture. In the start of this painting, I was really reaching for my burnt umber and realized I don't have it. So I will be mixing up a kind of burnt umber mixture. So the yellow and the red will give me an orange, and then the black added to it will give me a dark orange, kind of like the burnt umber. And this mixture will be what I'll use for my block-in, my drawing. Using a little bit of my white as a coolant, and then back to the red and the yellow. I'm really trying to not make such a bright brown color, but a more muted burnt umber, raw umber type mixture for my drawing. For my block-ins, I typically like to use bristle brushes. I have one brush that I designate my sort of like my charcoal brush, and then the other the eraser brush. What I mean by that is I have a drawing brush and I have an eraser brush to get going. But in the beginning, what I'm trying to do is really just establish a basic shape that encompasses the entire structure of the head. The start of any portrait, or any painting in particular, is for me one of the most fun times to really just make a mess. Really just get all my energy out there and make big shapes, make big decisions. It's a lot of fun for me. And it should be in the beginning. You don't really want to start timid. You don't want to start afraid, because if you start afraid, you're not really going to be confident in the ending. A good finish is just as good as a good start. We really want to get really well acquainted with the start. So what am I doing here? I'm working out the outside shape of the head and the outside shape of the hair, and I'm also taking a little bit of composition into consideration. Now this is just going to be a portrait study, so what that means is I don't want the portrait to be, I don't know, too far to the left, too far to the right, or exactly in the center. From my camera angle, it does look like the painting's in the center, but it's a little bit above the center. Right now I have the center line of the head, the axis of the eyes, and a mark for the nose, and now I'm starting to go into indicating the eye sockets. Indicating meaning I don't know where they are yet. I'm just making a simple shape right now. We want to start general. We want to work general to specific when oil painting. Working general to specific means we really want to be free. We want to be a little bit loose in the start, but we want to work with a tangible basic shape. Notice how I'm carving out just a simple almost parallelogram for the eye socket shape. Not really parallelogram, it's more of like a rectangle at the moment. But these basic shapes are what you can use to direct them into more specified shapes later on in the drawing, and using horizontal lines and vertical lines to pinpoint where things are relative to one another. We want to use the brush and trick our mind into thinking that we're using a pencil. We really want to have the accuracy of a pencil drawing whenever we're painting. A painting is only as good as the underlying drawing, so we really want to spend a lot of time in just working out the basic shapes. Drawing is all about problem solving with simple shapes. That's all it is. Let me demonstrate for you what's likely going on in my head at a time like this. It's really okay. I'm doing a portrait painting and I'm trying not to terrify myself because I know that the starts are always kind of scary. What I'm trying to do is keep my shapes simple and tangible and get myself something that I can work with. I literally have a dot and a line for the eyes, and I have rectangles for the eye sockets and 2 dots, 1 dot for the nose, another dot for the mouth. These are just simple placements that I can identify with and carve into with my eraser brush, as you can see, and really get a more exacting shape. For the eraser brush, I use a separate bristle brush, preferably a little beat up, and I dip it into my paint thinner, and then I try to almost completely dry it off on my paper towel, and then I use that to subtract the oil paint that's already on. As you can see, I'm trying to carve out the placement of the eye, and it's really like charcoal and a kneaded eraser. The eraser brush is really like the kneaded eraser, and I'm trying to think that way in my head. I'm really trying to keep that mentality of drawing in my head. And in fact, I do like to start portraits and figurative drawings or figurative paintings with charcoal, and then painting over them with an underpainting. That's the process that I like for longer poses, but for a study it should suffice to use the drawing brush and the eraser brush as I'm doing. It really can get the job done as long as you keep your shapes simple and pay attention to the proper placement of them. Allow me to come up with another analogy to drawing. If you think about a word search, you know how the answer is right in front of you and you just can't find it? And that's really what happens, at least to me, in a drawing. I want to keep my shapes simple. I want to place things as accurately as I can relative to one another, but sometimes I just can't see it. And I really have to stand back, and the answer is right in front of me, but I don't see it, and that really takes time to train your eye. Standing back helps a lot. Taking breaks, it really helps you get an objective eye. At this stage of the painting, all I really have are the placements of the features and the outside shape of the head established relative to the hair and to the neck. And that's about it. I don't want to have too many values in the face. If I have any values in the face, it's just from my eraser brush. That's really the foundation of everything. The light and the shade relative to the basic shapes. Carving out the outside shapes. Making sure the proportions work relative to one another. That's really the engine that drives the portrait painting to its likeness. And this is a good place to stop. If you're working from life and you have multiple sittings with a model, that's a good place to let the painting dry. But for this demonstration, we will be pushing it a little bit further. So to summarize the block-in, what we have are just the placements of the features and the basic shapes of light and shadow. That's it. That's all we needed for the block-in. Let's mix some colors with this Zorn palette. So what I'm doing right now is I'm using the 3 colors, the red, yellow, black, and putting them with a little bit of white. So the red and the white gave me a pink, and the white and the yellow ochre gave me more of like a creamy yellow color. And then when I get into the black and the white, it's going to give me a blue. And I'm using separate brushes for each of these puddles. And if you're wondering, what I'm doing right now is I'm just trying to get a variety of color mixtures with this Zorn palette. I'm not entirely sure how many colors I can get out of this, but my guess is a whole lot of variations of different colors. I'm not going to get a phthalo green or a cadmium green light by any means, but we don't really need that kind of brightness in a portrait per se, and you can use it and it's a beautiful thing to do, but these subtle mixtures are incredibly beautiful in portrait paintings. Using the cadmium red light and the yellow ochre, I'm getting an orange out of it, and it's fairly bright. It's a little saturated, probably too saturated to use for my flesh tones, but it's a good starting point. A lot of my flesh tone mixtures are typically some type of combinations of grays and oranges, believe it or not, but I use those mixtures just to get me going, and then I build more complex colors. So now getting into the yellow ochre and a little bit of white. So I have yellow ochre, a tad bit of white, and then the ivory black is going to give me a green. So yes, this red, yellow, black can give you a green, and it's a pretty nice green as well. I can use this green to create other more subtle colors with my pinks and the grays. Using just these 3 colors, I now know that I can achieve a blue, I can achieve an orange and a green. And now when I combine the orange that I've mixed with the green, so what that means is my cadmium red light and my yellow ochre were placed first, and then I go into a little bit of my ivory black. Then I can get a more complex, subtle, closer to flesh tone mixture that we have right here. Now let's see what happens if I start with the yellow ochre ivory black mixture first. I start out with the green that I already had, and then I add the orange to it. So what's gonna happen? It's gonna create a more subtle green, more darker muted green, kind of like the sap green that I use on my original palette. So check that out. We can really get a nice variety of color in just cadmium red light, yellow ochre, ivory black, and flake white. Granted, I'm using flake white replacement. So now I'm going to be going into the colors on the face. So I'm going to be mixing up the cadmium red light with the ivory black, kind of like the drawing color that I had, but with the introduction of my yellow ochre with some of the flake white. I'm going to be mixing up a more greenish color for the cast shadow of the face. Now I'm going back in with the ivory black and the cadmium red light, and just using those two on top of the color that I already had, I'm going to have a not straight black but fairly dark value to use for the accent of the side of the head as it turns into the hair. Now that I have the cast shadow painted in, I'm going to work my way up in the light, so I'm going to be mixing up the darkest light, so I'm mixing up the side tones, if you like. So what I did first was I made a green with my yellow ochre and my ivory black, and then with that green I muted it a little bit with the color that was already existing on the palette, and then I added a little bit of the cadmium red light into the mixture, but just a little bit, to get this subtle green color that I'm going to be using as a value for the side planes of the face. And the side planes of the face that I'm talking about are the eye socket right underneath of the eyebrow that I'm painting right now, turning into the eye. That's going to be one of the most emphatic darks, along with the darks of the side of the face as it turns into the shadow, and then after that it's really going to be just the side of the nose as it curls away from the light, and the turning of the face into the jaw. This value that I'm painting right now is also referred to as the Terminator. So the Terminator is the darkest light, but it's not yet in the shadow. I'm mixing up a color for the side plane of the nose, and it's first of all, its value is a little bit lighter than the side plane of the face, but it's also a little bit more of a neutral green. So I went ahead and mixed the green first, the yellow ochre and the ivory black. Then I cooled it down with the white, and then I brought it up a tad bit with the cadmium red light, but just a little bit to get this value and this color to work out. Another thing that I should probably point out is that I'm utilizing the tone of my surface that I'm working on. So I'm working on a panel, and I toned it with a gray acrylic. It's a middle gray that I toned with just a basic acrylic you can get. I got that acrylic paint from I believe Michael's. It's the basics acrylic, so that was the tone. I used the tone on the canvas to help me out with the values. I like to have a middle value tone on my canvas or my panel just because I want my lights to look light and my darks to look dark. That's really the only reasoning why I use that kind of tone. Now what I'm doing on my palette is I'm mixing up a generic value scale of basic flesh tones, and this time it's a little bit more intricate because I'm using these colors. But what I had already mixed up was a cadmium red light and my yellow ochre, and now I'm going to be cooling it down with the white and the ivory black. Hence I'm using orange and blue at the moment to create a more neutral, subtle flesh color. And remember that the first color that you put on your portrait painting doesn't necessarily need to be the last. I'd like to start a little bit darker and a little bit warmer on the flesh, just because as I build up the colors, they become cooler. And so now as I work my way up the value scale, I'm using my white and my yellow ochre mixed with my cadmium red light on top of the green that I already had to create another subtle value. And then at the top of the value scale, I'm just going to be using the colors I already had with a little bit of white and then a tad bit of my yellow ochre into the mix. And that should be it. That's going to be the generic flesh tones that I'll be using. I'll be I won't be taking these colors directly, but I'll use these as a reference to work from. And keeping my values in check like this really helps me out in the long run in terms of my organization. The Zorn palette is extremely beautiful at creating subtle flesh tones, and it it always astounds me how many beautiful color variations I can get using just these 3 colors. It's amazing what you can get out of it. So what am I doing now? I am using my flesh tone mixtures that I had. So this is probably an orange with cooled down with a little bit of blue and some green. What I'm doing is I'm painting a first pass on the flesh tones. Again, I'm going in a little bit warmer and a little bit darker because I know that as I work my values, I will be using a lot more white and hence cooling it down more. But also, a thing to note is I'm using a lot less paint right now. I'm painting rather thin, but I'm not using so much paint thinner. As I clean my brush, I go into my stand oil and paint thinner mixture. That's how I use my medium, is I just use it to clean off the brush, and then it just so happens that the medium itself gets into the paint and makes it more fluid. I want my paint to be fluid. I don't want it to be too washy, and I don't want it to be too thick either. I just want a fluid consistency of paint. I tend to build on the colors that I already have on my palette. So I'm using a white and an ivory black mixture on top of the colors that I already had on my mid-tone range. And I'm using that to create a not totally red or a not totally blue color that I'll be using for the white of the eye, known as the sclera. I'm using this mixture to get the value first of the white of the eye. For the color of the white of the eye, I really like to use a more of a cooler color, but I like to have a little bit of the flesh tones mixed into it. I don't know exactly why, but I think it harmonizes better. And then placing the highlight in between the iris of the eye and the white of the eye is a lot of fun. That's something a lot of old masters do, is placing the highlight right in between the dark and the light, kind of like a yin and yang kind of thing. I like doing it. I'm going to be mixing a color similar to my drawing color that I had, but a little bit warmer. So I had first my orange mixture that I already had, the red and the yellow, and then I darkened it with a little bit of the ivory black to create a dark muted orange. And then I went ahead and reapplied the cadmium red light, but I don't want it to be completely red either. And I'm mixing this color, and I have mixed this color so that I can paint in the dark accents of the mouth, and then I'm checking the outside of the mouth to see if it lines up where it should relative to the eyes. So I'm making marks for the outside corners of the mouth, and then a mark for the center of the mouth. Again, a painting or a portrait painting is really only as good as the underlying drawing. So while I have this drawing brush like color, I'm going ahead and re-establishing the outside shape of the lips. So I work big shapes to little shapes, and I'm giving the smaller shapes as much consideration as I did the larger surrounding shapes. I'm really trying to establish proper placements of everything with the lips, being the center of the lips, the outside of the lips, and I painted in the darks of the lips, and now I'm painting in the next darker values, exactly like I did with the outside of the face. Same treatment with the smaller shapes as I gave the bigger shapes. So check this out. I have a pre-mixed orange and a pre-mixed blue on the side of the palette right here, and I'm picking and choosing between those colors just so that I don't have to keep mixing them on the fly as I go. So now going up in the value scale on the flesh tones, I mixed an orange type mixture and I cooled it down with a neutral green, and that's what I'm using to paint the lighter portions of the face. Remember, I started a little bit more thin with my paint application in the beginning, but as I progress, I use more and more paint. I introduce more and more paint as I go, um, and that's really just to keep my drawing in check. I'm trying to get the drawing as correct as possible, and then once the drawing's all figured out, I can just gunk on the paint and get whatever kind of effects that I want to get later on. When I paint portrait or any kind of painting, I'm really trying to get an efficiency of means. I want to have I want to do the least amount of work on the painting possible to get the forms and the colors to read. And let me explain to you what I've done here. I have the light planes of the face being the top plane of the nose, and as you can see, there's the light plane of the nose. And I have the light planes of the cheeks and the forehead. You can see a little lighter mark on the forehead. And now I'm painting in the side plane of the eye as it rolls around the eye socket. I'm just using these basic planes right now to get the underlying structure of the face to work. And remember that it's all about shape, value, color. That's all there really is to form. Shape, value, color. And everything in between is just a variation of edge. I worked out the shape, I figured out the values, and now I'm going into the color. And of course there's more intricate values that I'm going to introduce later, but that's really the order of things. Shape, value, color. For the side plane of the face, I have more of a muted green. Um, I have the face a little bit more green as it turns into the shadow, and then as it creeps into the light, notice the big plane that I had just put in there. A little bit warmer, so that's more of the yellow ochre cadmium red light mixed to an orange, and then cooled down with the blue. That's more of what that shape is. With some more of my white, I'm going to be mixing right on top of the colors that I already had on the uh, higher end of the value scale. I have a yellow, kind of more on the greenish, a pale greenish color, and it's a kind of a careful mixture to paint the lighter plane of the eye. I can see a lot of the model's eye here, so I'm going to go ahead and take advantage of that and render the eye itself. It gets lighter closer to the highlight and progressively gets darker. It's safer to err on the cooler side with these colors in particular in the eyes. So yeah, I'm just creating that gradation across the eye. As we progress further into the painting, there is a whole world of smaller shapes and smaller value gradations that we can explore. And it can really be handled in the same way that the big shapes are handled, meaning we're breaking things down into shape, value, and color. So you can see I've introduced a number of different colors. I have the warmer area inside of the tear duct, and then I have a warmer value turning into the eyelid, cooler on the actual eye itself, and then a little bit more greenish on the indent of the eye socket closer to the tear duct, and now going in a little more of a yellowed value for the light region of the eye socket just under the eyebrow. Going back to the color mixtures, I'm using my orange, my premixed orange, and I'm putting it right on top of the mid values that I had, and then I'm going to adjust it a little bit more with the grays. Um, so I'm creating a warm kind of more on the pinkish color, and I'm going to be using this for the lighter planes of the lips. Again, I'm really astounded at the variety of subtle flesh colors that I can get out of just using yellow ochre, cadmium red light, ivory black, and white. I mean, it's amazing how many subtle variations of color I can get with just these few colors. I mean, imagine if I was able to add another 3 colors and use them as efficiently. Imagine what could be done. For the background, I just mixed up a neutral gray. I just want the cooler color in the background to contrast to warmer colors in the flesh. The photo reference has a more of a warm yellowish kind of uh, background to it, and I didn't really like that, so I'm kind of making up my own thing and having the color of the background contrast the color of the flesh. When finishing the painting, you really want to work the edges, um, and I'm just working the edge as it turns across the eyelid, and that really helps me complete the form, the curvature of the form. And then this subtle edge around the outside of the eye, that's all I really need to finish that portion of the eye. And for the nose, I'm sharpening up the edge, indicating division between the bottom plane of the nose and the mouth. Funny story here. I thought I had finished this painting, and then I went out to lunch, came back, and was astounded at my drawing mistake. I had the edge of the jaw a little too far, and remember I said keep your shapes simple, just in case you need to move things. Yeah, that's really become very helpful to me, because moving the side of the jaw a little bit to the left of the canvas, it really wasn't a life-changing event. And I can also take advantage of that and work the side planes of the face a little bit more into the shadow. And right about now, I'm pretty thankful that I chose Stand Oil as my medium, my Stand Oil and paint thinner mixture, because Stand Oil is a slow dryer. So I was able to go out for lunch for an hour and come back. After having worked on the painting for about 3 hours, I came back and saw that mistake, and my paint is still wet enough to keep working on. So I'm very thankful for that. And another thing to note, as I progress on this painting, I'm actually finding myself using thinner or lighter brushes. So I'm using more of a sable brush now to get more of these subtle gradations. Before I had much harder brushes. My Princeton Catalyst Polytip Bristle is my main brush that I use. But for these finishing touches, this is just a cheap sable brush from Michaels. I mean, I'm not endorsing Michaels or anything. It is just a cheap synthetic brush that I had on hand, and I'm using it to really get these final touches on the painting. Remember, I walked away from my painting to go out to lunch, and I came back, and it looked completely different. And that's good, getting that perspective. So now I've just mixed up a final flesh color that I'm going to put on the large forms of the face. On the final stages, I can really start to gunk on the paint. I like to build the painting a little bit thin in the beginning and then thicker as I go. The process is a little different with Alla Prima. Alla Prima is more of a straight up paint, as much paint as you can, modeling form. This is different. I did do this painting in one day. But since this is a more complete and comprehensive painting demonstration, I painted it in such a way that you could have let it dry between layers that I had already mentioned before. But in the end of this painting, or any kind of painting, I like to really take advantage of the fact that I have my drawing and my values established, and now I can go in with a big brush and make big decisions, and that makes the painting look like it's effortless. Making a painting look effortless takes a whole lot of effort, and that really depends on how well you can mix up your values and your colors in relation to one another, and at the end, just with a big brush, just push it all together and make those brush marks look as if you had painted this quickly and effortlessly. This extended painting demonstration was suggested to me by a number of viewers, so I wanted to make a more complete and comprehensive video that shows more of the actual process. Now this isn't the entire, this isn't all of the footage on its own. If I were to have done that, then you'd have about 4 hours worth of video, which I can do in the future, but for these purposes I edited and put what I thought would be the most essential information for this comprehensive painting demonstration. So really the final things that I will work out on this painting are really the turning values, the lightest or the darkest light. And remember how I started with that in the beginning? I'm just going back into that and again trying to get this edge to turn as smoothly as possible into the shadow. And again, let me reiterate that this extended painting demonstration was suggested by a number of viewers that wanted to see longer and more extended videos of me actually painting. So if you have any suggestions that you would like to give me, such as painting a Vermeer master copy or Rembrandt or whatever, as long as it's portrait painting related, just let me know in the comment section. And if this is your first time watching one of my portrait painting demonstrations, I'd really would like to thank you and invite you to watch the rest of my paintings. And if you're a returning subscriber, thank you so much for watching all of my portrait painting demonstrations, and stay tuned for next week's video.